So I don't usually get hyped about games that are not released yet. There have been way too many disappointments for me to fall for that yet again. But I have to say that after seeing the most recent closed test for Chrono Odyssey, I am pretty bought into this game right now. For those of you who haven't seen the game yet, the easiest way I can summarize it is it's kind of like co-op Elden Ring combined with the best parts of New World. I'm going to go over some key reasons in this video of why my confidence in this game has gone up so much recently, but I'm also going to go over some concerns at the end of the video about what might still hold Chrono back from its full potential. First thing I'm excited about is that the game starts at level 1. There is a little bit of hand holding right at the beginning, kind of tutorial style, the way you would expect, but very early on, multiple paths to progression open up. You are not just locked into the main story quest where you autopilot from point A to point B and kind of spam through all the dialogue in a very linear fashion. The devs even say in the end of one of their most recent videos that basically, like, when you play the closed test that's coming up this next week, don't just follow the main quest. And you will experience that right off the bat in this game. The early crafting feels really meaningful. Early drops you get from mobs when you're like level 5 feel like significant upgrades. The early fights that you're in are actually difficult. You have to pay attention. That's one of the reasons why those early upgrades and the early crafting and everything is meaningful, is because those early challenges are not just a foregone conclusion. You do actually have to play the game. You can't just run on autopilot. And this is just in such sharp contrast to the typical modern MMO where the leveling or story phase of the game is basically just this long, boring, extended tutorial, and then you have to get to max level and then the real content starts. In Chrono, the game begins right away. You're going to feel invested right away. You're going to have different paths to progress through the game right away compared to some of your friends who might have a different play style. So I just really appreciate this return to a more integrated leveling journey that we're actually going to get immersed in and enjoy, rather than something that we're going to feel like we have to push through to finally get to the good part. Second reason that I'm excited for this game is the clear communication that I have seen up to this point. You guys probably have seen the interview that Canon did with the studio director. If not, I will go ahead and link that in the description. Big props to Canon here for asking some fantastic questions. An interview like this can really expose whether a director kind of knows what they're doing or knows what they're talking about. And for the most part, I was really impressed here. There are a couple answers that I do disagree with, and I will talk about those at the end of the video. But even though I disagree with some of the things he's saying, I never got the sense that he was being fake, that he was dodging or being falsely optimistic, or kind of like salesy. A lot of these directors or studio people, like when you interview them, it's the very salesman vibe. It feels kind of phony. And in this case, you can tell that the guy is just like straightforwardly like, oh yeah, this question, I have thought about this. I have a good answer to this. I know why we did this. It's on purpose. You don't get the vibe that Chrono Studio is just copying what other MMOs are doing, which is usually the case and usually why these guys don't have good answers to questions like this. But he did seem to be very honest about the questions, including questions like PvP, which can be kind of polarizing and can actually turn people off from even trying your game. You know, from a marketing standpoint, if you have a player who's mostly interested in PvP and you're managing expectations about PvP in an interview saying, well, it's not really our main focus, we're going to work on it, but it's mostly a PvE game. If they hear something like that, they might just not even bother at all, right? So you're losing a potential customer there by being honest and forthright, and yet that's the route he chose to go anyways, and I do respect that. And especially, I appreciate the clear communication on the next topic, which is going to be my third reason I'm hyped for this game: no pay to win. Canon really presses him on this here and gets him to reiterate multiple times that there will not be any pay to win. In Chrono Odyssey, he says that this is one of their highest priorities. The only thing they're going to have are things like emotes, cosmetics, different mounts that you can get, but it'll just be cosmetic differences. The only thing he mentioned that sounded a little suspect is that they could have a battle pass in some limited fashion. But honestly, even if they do have a battle pass that gives you like, a handful of upgrade materials or something, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. It's not going to be something that you can just continuously buy forever. There might be some slight, boost in resources or something that you get every month from buying the battle pass. And it seems very clear here that this is something that they want to stand by. He did not equivocate on this answer. It was over and over again when he was asked, no pay to win. So at this point, even if they want to do it, they're locked in. They would receive an insane amount of backlash if they tried to 180 now. Fourth reason I'm excited for this game is meaningful content no chores. They talk in this interview about dailies and how that is not something that they're going to do. When you play Chrono, the content that you're encountering, even early on, is just good content. It doesn't feel forced. It's not like, oh, I have to do this. You want to be doing everything you're doing in the early game. Again, I've only seen the first like 15 hours or so of gameplay. So it is possible that over the long run, you kind of run out of things to do. A lot of MMOs, their strategy in order to inflate playtime is to add these daily chores or these repetitive tasks. But personally, I would rather play a 300-hour game and then run out of things to do than play a 3,000-hour game where the only reason I'm playing is because I'm doing the same daily chore over and over again and kind of like logging in because I feel like I have to or else I'm going to fall behind. That whole mobile game kind of dopamine chase mentality, like that's out there. If you want that, there are plenty of games that provide that. A game that is actually aiming for a maybe lower amount of content overall, but a much higher quality of content totally goes against industry norms. Like the industry is very quantity over quality. And, I would rather just have a super enjoyable journey and then run out of things to do rather than be stuck in like a chore treadmill for months or years. Even though like I'm not actually having that much fun, the sheer number of hours should not be the metric we use to judge these games. We should judge them based on if they're actually enjoyable. I know it's like a novel concept for MMO players actually having fun playing the game. But yeah, worst case scenario, like if you run out of things to do at the end of this game, then you could always just go find another game to play, something else to do. It's not the end of the world. I do think alts playing through this game a second time on other characters because of the quality of the content is going to be very enjoyable. Just like playing through Elden Ring with like a completely different build the second time. Even though it's content you've all seen before, it's just such high quality that it's worth doing again. So I love this approach and I respect them for going against the industry trend in this regard. And also, I'm not totally out of hope that the game won't have good in-game loops. I just haven't seen them yet. But there is at least one in-game mode that I think will be very compelling and fun to do over and over again. We'll talk about that a little bit later. For now, let's go into reason number 5, which is the clean combat design. So, unlike most Korean MMOs, this game does not overcomplicate things. There's no weird or hidden stats as far as I can tell. There's no formulas that you need like a PhD to understand. For the most part, you can just intuitively figure out whether or not an upgrade is worth it. You don't have to go watch like a 30-minute YouTube guide that's going to show you like the hidden breakpoints of a attack speed or something like that. Again, I've only seen early game. It's possible that things get weird later on, but so far, early game itemization is very satisfying and clear. The devs have said multiple times that they're going with sort of an easy to learn, hard to master approach. And so they do plan on having build variety and maybe making things a little bit more complicated in end game, but at least getting into the game and understanding like strength and dex and, whether or not I should be using this item or that item. It's really accessible, guys. The abilities that you're using and the way to combo them together, again, very accessible. There is always a risk of making things too simple, and then you kind of have everyone playing the same build and doing the same rotation. I don't think that's going to happen here. You can have a lot of variety while still keeping things easy to kind of learn and get into. Again, you can think of like Souls or New World Combat. Those games don't have a ton of different inputs, but there is a high variety of things you can do, and there's a high variety of ways that you can use your skills. Even if you have a handful of abilities, how are you using that ability? How are you positioning? How are you targeting and aiming and things like that? The combat, I would say, is a little bit more fluid and like combo-y than Souls combat. A lot of times, especially like with Elden Ring in particular, some of the bosses you're fighting, it's like you have to, they get to attack 5 times, then you have like one opening and you can finally move. I think it's more back and forth in Chrono. And again, only saying the early bosses, so maybe the end game bosses become more Elden Ringy. But so far, like it's very back and forth. You learn the boss's move, you kind of try to read when he's going to attack or where he's going to attack. You dodge out of position, you retaliate. If you overcommit, you can get punished just like you could in any Souls fight. But the punishment isn't as bad as what you'd expect from like an Elden Ring. The biggest thing I would say here is that in contrast to New World, the PvE in this game feels like it was actually made for an action combat game. In New World, I always felt like it was an action combat game that had tab targeting style dungeons where like you still had to have a tank because there was all this, unavoidable damage. You still had to have healers because people couldn't really dodge. And so taking damage was just inevitable for everyone in the party. Combat here is much more like co-op Elden Ring. There is no tank, healer, DPS. Basically, everybody is DPS. Some people could be tankier than others, and I'm sure there are going to be like a handful of healing abilities. I think some of those are on classes that aren't out yet, so I haven't seen a lot of it. But you're not going to be locked into the Holy Trinity. It's not going to be like, oh, our healer isn't on, so we can't do this run. You'll be able to do any content in this game with pretty much any party composition, and it's just going to change the approach that you have to that fight. So like if you have a really range heavy comp, you might be kiting more. If you have a really melee heavy comp, then maybe someone will focus on tanking so that the other melee can get like free backshots or whatever. But there's going to be a ton of fluidity in terms of how you can approach these. You don't just need like one rigid specific meta composition. Not to say that some classes are probably not going to end up being more overpowered than others, because we did see a little bit of that in the test as well. But right now, I do really like the combat a lot. I think it's headed in the right direction, and hopefully the balancing issues, I'm optimistic that they can work out at least some of those by the time the game launches. Reason number 6 is the art direction, feel, and vibe of the game. With a lot of these newer games, especially in Unreal, you can put something together in Unreal Engine and it's going to look good, but it won't necessarily look inspired. This game definitely feels like the art direction has some actual soul behind it. They talk about their inspiration in some of the interviews. They talk about things like Prometheus and kind of like the cosmic horror. And the vibe of this game is just captivating. You just want to be in this world doing stuff. You want to be exploring. You want to be interacting with everything that you can. The atmosphere in the dungeons is very creepy and immersive. Your gear progresses visually, something that is, again, like not very present in these, especially games that have a cosmetic cash shop. You don't have to, go to the shop and buy something to look better. When you actually loot new items, the items look good. Like you're excited not just because of the stats, but you're excited to see your character progress visually through the game as well. I have seen some complaints about things like the lighting and how hard certain areas are to see. And I could see this complaint. It hasn't really bothered me yet. That might just be because I like suffering when it comes to these darker atmosphere type games. I mean, I'm thinking like Tome of the Giants from Dark Souls 1. There's some scenarios where these games like to punish you with the lighting, and so I don't know if some of that is just part of what they're going for, or maybe some of it does genuinely need to be like fixed and worked on. But so far for me, I just love the look and feel of the game. This is the part that you like can't really fix easily, right? Like this is the part of the game you have to get right. Some of the polish and kind of design flaws of these games are things that can always be fixed, but you can't fix like the underlying feel or like captivation that you have when you're diving into a new MMO world. That has to be there. I've played games that are like well designed, but they just don't grip you in that way. And, like I said, the design I think is a lot easier to fix than kind of the underlying soul of the game. And I do feel like that soul is present in Chrono. Reason number 7 is abundant solo and small scale content. Now, don't get me wrong, I like large scale content, but it has to be built on top of a foundation of small and especially solo content. Otherwise, you get situations like Throne and Liberty currently, where I'm having a ton of fun every 2 weeks at the big siege, but on a normal day to day basis, I just feel like I have nothing to do in the game. Again, PvE wise, we can compare this to Elden Ring, where if you come across a super hard boss, one option is to summon other players to help you. Another option is to level up or to get better gear or to just practice. And in theory, because of the type of combat that this is, you should be able to solo pretty much every Chrono fight by yourself, unless there's some specific mechanical reason why that's not possible. So even if your party members die, it's not an automatic wipe, and this is going to lead to some hero moments where, everyone in your group is dead and you're the last one alive, and you still have the opportunity to clutch the fight. Now, Elden Ring is specifically designed for those solo fights. For Chrono, the fights are more designed for 3, 5, or eventually 10-person encounters. So while co-op Elden Ring is kind of like an additional thing that's on top of the base game, and Chrono, I think it's going to be more of a core focus as far as how the bosses are made. But I still like having the opportunity and the incentive to group up without being forced to group up. And then outside of dungeons, just exploring the game is super comfy when you are solo. You might stumble across a field boss and decide to call in some help, or you might just try to take it down yourself or fight it with whoever is around. As a solo player, you can also just go around like mining and chopping and fishing, looking for rare materials. And that brings me to my next reason. Reason number 8 is highly rewarding crafting. So you can think about like New World gathering in this game. Pretty much everything you come across, like every tree, every rock, is gatherable in some way for the most part. You can completely level up through crafting and gathering. In theory, I think you could do this all the way to max level, like without ever killing a single mob. I don't know how accessible the in-game crafting recipes are going to be without killing mobs. Like you might have to go get a mob drop in order to get the right recipe or the right component that you need to craft some of the in-game gear. But they have said that in-game crafting and in-game grinding are both going to be viable in terms of getting like your best in slot items. There's going to be some variance, some horizontal progression. Maybe the grinding item will have different stats than the crafting item, but they won't necessarily be better stats. You can think of like RNG chase crafts, kind of like it was in New World, or games like Path of Exile, where you're trying to get the perfect combination of like stats or bonuses to an item all in the same place. These kind of RNG chase crafts can provide just a lot of content for crafters who want to keep gathering, who want to keep hunting for rare materials and slamming for these RNG perfect crafts, even like deep into end game. Those can still have a lot of value. If they make it too easy, then the economy floods and it doesn't really matter anymore. But if they get the difficulty right, then it could be really exciting crafting that perfect item. And depending on how hard it is to grind for the equivalent drop from dungeons or something, I like the fact that they are at least stating that the goal is to make both of these viable paths. That is certainly the case so far in early game. Early game crafting and gathering does feel fantastic. It feels like it is absolutely worth the time that you put into it, both in terms of the gear that you're making, but also just in terms of like the leveling and the progress that it's giving to your character. Next reason I'm excited for the game, this one we don't have a ton of info on yet, but it has the potential to be extremely good. I referenced this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the game potentially running out of content in endgame. There is a mode called Eden, which sounds like a Tarkov Dark and Darker style extraction PvP mode. They haven't said much about this in interviews, but there was a trailer that they put out recently where they showcased some of it and described it a little bit. It sounds like you're going to be going into a zone just like you would in Dark and Darker or a similar game and fighting mobs, getting loot. But PvP is enabled too, so you'll be able to encounter other players there. You'll be able to fight them. And if you die in this mode, you drop the things that you've looted. So it's not like you drop the gear that you came in on, or at least that's not what it sounds like. But the resources, materials that you're looting while you're there, those are all at risk. So if you die, you can leave those behind. If you kill other players, it sounds like you're going to be able to take their materials from them, and then you have to be able to extract from this mode alive. I think this has the potential to be so much fun. These extraction style games, I mean, this is already a really popular genre. For me personally, I usually end up playing them a little bit and then kind of just, I don't know, they don't really hook me over the long run. And I think part of that is because of the overarching progression, like the fact that there is no persistent world that my actions are tied to, I think takes away some of the satisfaction. But in a situation like this, where you have an MMO as a baseline, and then you have the extraction mode on top of that, that just sounds like a brilliant combination. This is pure copium optimism. We haven't seen this mode at all. It could totally end up being a flop, but in theory, this sounds really exciting. I at least love the concept. I hope they pull this off because this has the chance to be, I think, one of the most fun in-game activities we've ever seen in an MMO. And then the final reason that I am hyped up for this game right now is that they have stated they are aiming for a global launch and simultaneous updates between the Korean and the global versions of the game. Now, I don't know what aiming for means. I didn't get a good feel from this interview about how strongly committed they were to a global launch, but at least sounds like it's what they're going for. And the closed test that's coming up this week is, simultaneous for Korea, Europe, North America. I think those are the 3 servers that are going to be available. It's not like there was a Korean test and then 2 months later there was an NA EU test. So far they are on a global schedule. I hope that they stick to that. If this game actually launches on a purely global release, that will be so much more enjoyable than what we have seen from previous Korean games, where by the time the West gets their version, everything is already spoiled, everything is already solved. This could be a true, fresh experience for everyone playing it around the globe. If they stick to this, I think this is such a good reason to be potentially excited for the game again if they stick to this. All right, now let's talk about some concerns that I have that could potentially hold the game back. The first one is going to be the lack of large scale content. I know I highlighted the small scale focus as something that I'm excited for, but I'm a large scale enjoyer too. And I know a lot of players are going to be looking for that larger scale content. It sounds like this is something they might do in the future, but I would not hold your breath. The biggest PvE content that we're probably going to get is like 10-person raids. And then the PvP zones and the Eden mode that they've discussed, I'm guessing that these are going to be a lot of smallish fights. It's possible that some Zerg fights will kind of break out in the in-game PvP zones, especially if there are important like gatherable materials there. You can think of like the orichalcum mining in New World. Usually it was like one or two people fighting over the mining rotations, but in theory, you could call your whole guild out there and then it could be like a 30v30 over these stupid little mining nodes, right? So I think that that would be possible in Chrono. I don't really know how well the game is going to perform under those conditions. We have not seen anything like anywhere close to a 30v30 in this game. The closed tests that they have been very limited in terms of player size. So if you are a large scale enjoyer, then this game might just not have that much content for you. Next concern is the end game loop. Talked about this a little bit as well. We just haven't really seen what kind of end game content they have to offer, but I think we can guess just based on the quality over quantity approach that the game has that there probably is not going to be a ton of stuff to do at end game. I said this before, but I do think some of this is on us as players to kind of change our psychology around. The hyper fixation that MMO gamers have on endgame, I think, is a little bit counterproductive. There are plenty of, incremental, infinite dopamine loop games out there if you want to play the same game for 10,000 hours. But if you're looking for like a curated quality experience, that's always going to contradict the sheer volume of time that you could spend in the game. Like you can't have 10,000 hours of Elden Ring style content. It's just not developmentally feasible. But overall, this one is more of a question mark rather than something I'm super worried about. It is very possible that they come up with in-game loops and horizontal progression and things like that that keep us invested for much longer than I'm anticipating. But I would say at this point now, I would expect that the overall amount of content that we get from Chrono on launch is probably going to be on the lighter end. And so might have to take a break or play some alts. Next concern is some of the buggy movements and animations that I've seen. The mobs can sometimes tweak out a bit. Sometimes they can like freeze completely or become non-responsive. The game hasn't really been tested with a lot of players in the same area. And so it's very possible that in this upcoming test, we're going to see things break once there's like a million people in town or a million people trying to fight the same field boss or something like that. I think the horse movement and some of the character running and stuff looks just kind of weird. So there's a lot of stuff that I think could still be polished and worked on. I'm hoping that they use this beta period to figure those out because it can be kind of disruptive and immersion breaking and also balance breaking in terms of the mob behaviors. Like you don't want mobs becoming non-responsive. By the time the game goes live, those issues really need to be worked out. Next concern is that they have said PvP is not a central focus of the game. This I find somewhat surprising given that one of the end game loops, the Eden mode, seems to be very PvP focused. It seems like you're just going to be able to attack people in this mode whenever you go in. So in that regard, they've talked about how Eden is going to be core to your progression. So there's a little bit of mixed messaging there as far as like how important or necessary PvP is actually going to be at end game. But the other thing that I didn't like about one of the answers that he gave is he said that 90% of people prefer PvE according to like surveys or statistics or something. And this just can't be true. I mean, if you look at MOBAs, shooters, etc., there's a huge thirst for PvP games. When it comes to MMOs in particular, most PvP MMOs are just bad. This doesn't mean that players categorically prefer PvE. This just means that we need better PvP options. So an analogy that I would give is like if you go into a restaurant that has steak and chicken, and the chicken is like really juicy and well seasoned, but the steak is overcooked and dry and bland, and then you took a survey and then 90% of the people who took the survey said that they preferred the chicken. Well, that's not because they categorically prefer chicken. That's because at that restaurant, the chicken is better than the steak. And right now, the restaurant, the MMO genre, just doesn't have many good items on the menu when it comes to PvPs. So, yeah, you could ask people and they're going to say, well, I generally have more fun PvEing. But that doesn't mean that people don't want PvP. I mean, there's crazy popular PvP games that dominate in terms of player count and revenue and longevity, etc. So I hope that they hear feedback from PvP players and maybe put a little bit more focus into this side of the game. They have said that there are end game PvP zones, which is really what New World needed. Like if the last 2 or 3 zones in New World were all PvP flagged, and you had to choose whether to go to kind of like the overcrowded PvE area or whether to risk it and go gather your materials in the PvP zone, I think that that creates a really interesting tension at end game. So we'll see if that's the route that they go here with those zones. I don't know how useful they're going to be, but in the interview with Canon, they did basically say like, yeah, there's some stuff to go there, but at the same time, if you're not a PvPer, you're probably just not going to go there. So we just don't know yet. But there's not going to be any sieges or really large scale PvP probably ever, it sounds like. So just don't hold your breath if that's the kind of content that you're going after. They might add arenas in the future, but again, probably not at launch. Next concern is that the guild system is very limited. It seems to just be purely a social feature so far. Like in this last test, there were no guild features really, maybe like a chat and a member list. There wasn't much you could do with it. You can't like level your guild up. There's not guild raids or like, I don't know, there just didn't really seem to be any guild content whatsoever. It's possible that they just disabled some of this for the test. Maybe they do plan to have some of this for launch, but in the interview as well, he said something along the lines of like, our guild is mostly just a social feature right now. So I find that a little bit disappointing. Guilds are just such a good way to bring more content into these games. Guilds could also potentially be a really good PvP feature if you had like guild wars that guilds can opt into to fight each other in the open world, rivalries and such. That kind of stuff is always really sick. I think it would be perfect for a game like this. So I do hope that's something that they improve. There was another answer that he gave to one of Cannon's questions that I didn't like. He said that they were working with a system where, because of the congestion of too many players trying to gather the same resources, some resources would scale in respawn based on the number of players around. I've just never seen a game do this well. If you increase the respawns significantly, then people will just abuse this because they'll use like alt characters or guildies and they'll just stand around AFK and like abuse the scaling so that they can gather more rare materials. There's also just something about it that I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. It's too metagamey and kind of takes away the rewarding feeling of stumbling upon those materials organically. Like when you go to an area of the world that nobody's gathered for a while and all the rare nodes are up and you get to gather them all, like I feel like there are situations like that if we just end up being like, oh, the system scales with how many people are around, so if nobody's around it takes forever to respawn, but if 30 people are standing next to it, then it respawns every minute. I don't think that that's a good approach to this, and I think it's just going to feel cheesy if that's the direction they go in Chrono. And then the last concern that I have is the dual crossbow archetype. This is stupid. Fantasy crossbows should be big and slow. This trend where we have these double crossbows, now, like, it doesn't make any sense. How do they reload? Like, what, the string pulls itself back, I guess. Where are the bolts coming from? Is there a clip? Like, it's a gun. I don't know why we're calling it a crossbow. It's a gun. You're basically holding 2 wooden Uzis, and it needs to stop. Somebody needs to put a stop to this. If you want to see what a crossbow should look like, look at Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, where it takes like 5.5 minutes to reload it, and then it one-shots everything. That's perfect. This dual crossbow thing, like if you want to add guns to the game, just add guns to the game. All right, that's it for now. There's a lot more to talk about, so I'll probably post an updated review after this next test on the 20th through the 22nd. Once I've gotten a little more hands-on with the game. I will be streaming the upcoming test pretty much nonstop, starting on Friday morning on both YouTube and Twitch. So I hope to see you there.